Welcome back to Side Quests VIII, episode 11. Here to talk about Final Fantasy VIII, and in particular, a missile silo in Galbadia with my perennial companion and non-switchable party member, Wes Schantz. How are you doing, Wes?
Good. I'm sorry. Someone just started mowing their lawn, it sounds like. So I'm gonna adjust here, but I'm good otherwise. How are you?
I'm doing well. I think in this post-COVID world, listeners and watchers have a certain amount of sympathy for things like lawns being mowed and dogs being present, and the fact that they have more accessibility to content, I think, makes them more understanding of more personal foibles happening. That said, my friend, we don't have as much time as usual. We're also meeting at a slightly different time from usual, and I appreciate you accommodating my schedule. What is Final Fantasy about if not about friendship, my friend? But I thought I might give a very brief synopsis of what we went through, not very much. Talk a little bit about music from this time and music from last time. If you hear any weird growling in the background, that's just my dogs. By the way, hey, hey, hey. And I'm just going to try and keep them from fighting with each other too much. So in any case, last time we finally got out of the D District prison in Galbadia, which takes a substantial amount of the beginning of the second disc. It is itself like a new beginning, like a new starting point where one has to spend some amount of time and do various tutorials in order to learn new story and also game mechanics, in particular how to manipulate two teams at once, and getting familiar with switching GFs, switching magic, dealing with the fact that certain GFs are more aligned with certain characters than with others, and there are little bars that indicate that. But then I think we sent the same team to the missile silo, Selfie, Renoa, and Irvine, and they get in by means of taking a Galbadian army vehicle and being in disguise, and then they take on Galbadian uniforms, very similar to a conceit we saw in Final Fantasy VII, not only in terms of the major spoiler sort of mystery enigma at the heart of it, but also when one has to do that little dance in front of, I believe, Heidegger in Shinra uniform, and one has that little memory where I used to be so proud to put this on, which was itself a strange memory for Cloud to have. In any case, we get to play dress up, do a little bit of Don Quixote here, get to play as not mercenaries now, but as soldiers, and there's an interesting contrast there. A little bit of Metal Gear Solid happens. We get to choose whether to try and be cool and get through this area, not truly Metal Gear Solid in that one's not really sneaking, or one can fight through. And so there's a choice to be made. Again, I would say similar to Final Fantasy VII, where you choose when going up the Shinra building, whether to fight, whether to go up a million stairs or to fight up the building as one goes. I think I chose the stairs. And in this case, I actually chose not to fight as much as possible. We then are confronted, I think for the third time, with the timing mechanic. The first time being followed by that mechanical spider. This time we also have a timer and are followed by, rather are impeded by a mechanical creature of some sort that we have to defeat within this finite amount of time, again, drawing our attention to time. And then we witness something that I think is sort of horrible. Even though we've had a chance to turn up the error ratio of these cruise missiles that are going to be launched, the missiles are launched, 12 of them, and there's at least a 20 or 30% chance, if one ran the simulations in the control room, that Garden will be hit. And so there's this moment of defeat. And then that's followed by an even greater moment of defeat where Renoa and Selfie consider the fact that they want to do more with their lives, wonder whether their lives are over when they realize they're trapped. And even Irvine thinks that he's on the team only because Squall doesn't trust him. And so there's this sort of moral defeat, and then a giant CGI explosion, which would seem to suggest that they got blown to smithereens, and would support your hypothesis that some character needs to die, and particularly a love interest sort of character. Just following that, we're back to home, Balamb Garden, but it's very strange home with new music. Save point is missing in the entryway now, very not home-like. There are now enemies released, and there is some sort of conflict between Garden Master Norg, all capital, and whom I had not heard of before this, and the Garden faculty members and the Seeds, most of whom have been pushed away. We only played 2 that, though, but right at that entryway, one gets to see Fujin and Raijin and ask them what side they're on. And interestingly, they say they're on Cypher's side. And Squall wonders, he's thrown in his lot with the sorceress. Are you sure you want to be with him? Particularly because that would then suggest that they wanted the Galbadian missiles to hit this garden, seeing as Idea, who is now Cypher's boss, is the one who gave Cypher the command to attack and to deal with the garden and the Seeds in the same way that Darth Vader is told to deal with the Jedi. And that's where we get to. So, Wes, well, what did I miss? What do you have to say about that?
I hadn't made the connection with dressing up as soldiers, but now that you mention it, yeah, that's exactly what this is, a reprise of that that trope, but also that specific reference to the previous game where your main character thought he was a soldier, has these memories of being a soldier, but never really was. And in this game, we've been having memories of playing as characters who were soldiers too, right? And they had the whole thing on except for the helmet, right? So we could tell they had a personality, at least a little bit. They weren't sort of faceless in that respect. So it is kind of interesting how wearing the different uniform changes the way that our characters are interacting with everything, but also with the series itself and with the game itself. And yeah, the way that these two scenes are juxtaposed is interesting too, right? So like on the one hand, we see the missile site and how everyone there is eerily calm / bored and sort of like disinterested. There's that banality of evil very much again in evidence there, as opposed to at the garden, everyone is frantically rushing around, but it's unclear why. Like, it's not because the missiles are incoming, or at least it doesn't seem that way. It's because there's some other sort of power struggle going on. This thing that's sort of been in the back burner the whole time is now coming to the fore, right? Where there's someone else who has secretly been in charge of Garden the whole time, right? And it comes back to Idea's question about, voiced by Seifer, right? But like, what is seed? What are seeds for actually? And we're, I guess, going to dig into that. But I was also miffed by the absence of the save point. I didn't know what the point of that was, other than to try to keep the player going, like try to not have a break between these two episodes. I mean, in some sense, they're happening simultaneously, like in terms of the time within the action. And so I get that, but on the other hand, it's just annoying. Like, then I had to just backtrack and go all the way outside of the garden, which to me breaks the mood much more so than just having the save point there. Like, why not just have the save point there? I don't know. So I was just like kind of confused by that decision on the part of the developers. And yeah, this is it's a little bit tense, because there's that timer, but it's also pretty comical. And so again, there's that disconnect between like, what am I supposed to be feeling here, right? And I think that is very Don Quixote as well, right? Particularly for modern readers, we read that book and it's funny, but it's also sort of cruel, or not even just sort of cruel, like very cruel at times, and very bracing, and biting. and it's similar here where it's like on the surface, this is very serious. We're trying to save lives. Um, but it's slapstick, it's goofy, it's a strange mashup of tones and emotions. And yeah, there is something moving about it, very existential. The missiles are coming, whether we try to stop them or not, they're inevitable. And yet at the same time, it's kind of silly. Yeah, the soldiers like pop out of the broken down tank device and they're like on fire. And I mean, yeah, it's just a bizarre way to conclude this whole part. Oh, I will mention, before I went into the missile place, I went back to visit Dalet's, or not Dalet, Delling City, um, because there was a card that I had to acquire, the strongest card I've gotten yet. It's Renoa, and of course you get it from her father. Um, there's a little like a little give and take you have to do where he mentions, I've always wanted an Ifrit card. If you could maybe lose that Ifrit card to me, I'd consider playing my Renoa card. I don't usually use my Renoa, but if you gave up an Ifrit, so it's like this kind of sacrifice you have to do. Once you lose the Ifrit card to him, he'll play Renoa, or at least he has a chance of doing it. He played it right away in mine, and it's easy to win because she's the only good card he has. And then he says immediately, "Oh, that Ifrit card you gave me, yeah, I lost it to somebody else. I lost it to Martine. So maybe you'll have to get it back from them." That guy who runs the garden. I think he says the former head of the garden, though, because of course the sorceress has taken over the garden. Yeah, so a lot of stuff has happened, in a short time. Somehow he lost the Ifrit card right as we were playing him for the Renoa card, and yeah, this two things, the missiles and the garden happening simultaneously. So.
Yeah, no, that is what is it? I believe one of the commentators on Ulysses calls that technique spatial form, when contemporaneous actions are happening but have to be represented as one after the other because of either the medium of the novel or the video game. But to that point, and this will help us back to small texts, is the squall is dead theory. So we and just a few things we've witnessed in this game so far is we've seemingly seen Cypher die, we've seemingly seen a president assassinated, we've seemingly, and sometimes these things end up not having been the case, and we seemingly saw Squall impaled, which you would imagine killed him, but didn't. Now we see these missiles shot off after having seen the Trabian missiles shot off, and then a blown up missile silo or base where our friends were. And so this game has shown us some shocking some shocking moments if one is engaging with the characters and feeling some degree of sympathy and empathy with them. There have been some real gut punches thrown at us, and so there is a sort of a funny theory, the Squall is dead theory, that I want to engage with just for a moment, because I think it's interesting if one considers what we've seen in Disc 2, something like a reflection in an afterlife sort of way of what we've seen in Disc 1. In particular, I'm thinking about first, I guess, Balamb Garden as prison is an interesting way of looking at it. But when we are in the missile silo, I think it's really interesting the sense of repetition that we have. And I'll give 3 examples of what I think are repetition. We have these 2 Biggs and Wedge sort of trinities. There's like a captain of the garden officer who's red, who looks like, I think, Biggs. Maybe it's Wedge in this one. I can't keep them straight. I kill them too quickly with my characters. And then there are 2 of the lower ranking common soldiers, but they're not called Biggs and Wedge. Mix that also with, so last time we talked about when we first find Squall, there's that sort of military-esque music that is called the Oath. It plays when he's like feeling noble, or it's like taking on a leadership role or something like that. And I mentioned a different song that plays when Renoa shows back up right after she's kicked Irvine, and that song riffed "Eyes on Me," which comes from the first disc and from a different relationship. And so it is sort of a remix or an overlay on that initial theme. Um, Come back to this part of the playthrough again with Renoa, though I chose to send her this time. When she and Selfie and Irvine are considering the fact that they wish to live, a new song comes on. And this is a song that, if you listen to it long enough, starts to riff the Balamb Garden theme. And so there are multiple sort of rehashings, remixes, throwbacks to the first disc that, if one were, I think, trying to see the second disc as sort of I don't know, an unfolding at a different level of a similar plane, or on a different plane, a similar plot of action, that'd be very interesting. I think perhaps another way to read it is that these sort of iterations are what make Final Fantasy fun to play. Unlike Dragon Quest, which gives consistency and tradition, part of what one gets from Final Fantasy is design. So getting to feel the process of iteration at work and transformation, I think, has tremendous value. And I think for us at the age we first played it, probably taught us something about, the iterative power of transformation. That, you don't go from level 1 to 100 all at once. 1 to 7 to 9. But I just wanted to bring up and clear up the song issue that we had last time, which we did clear up. Mentioned that there are songs being remixed or reintegrated and remade in the second disc that come from the first disc, and to suggest that suggests some sort of unfolding relationship, whether it be the Squall is Dead theory or it's just part of the natural iteration of the game. I don't know, but I did want to bring it up.
Yeah, I think that part of the iteration thing with the music is, again, it's not just a cross from one song to another, but also within each song, right? There's something about musical structure that almost requires repetition with variation. You announce the theme, you have some kind of change of key or rhythm, or of some sort of blending with other musical ideas, and you come back to the theme. You return. There's that sense of going out and coming back that's pretty much built into at least Western music, which is underlying the musical like structures of the games. And I know that the Balamb Garden song in particular, right? We kind of talked about, like, it's such a soothing, calm sort of opening to the game. And yeah, we talked about how, like, disc 2, you're opening in a more traditionally recognizably JRPG sort of setting, but again, calm and peaceful and all that. And so it is especially jarring to see that song that's very calming is playing when something terrifying is happening, right? The explosion is imminent at the missile site. And then you go back to the setting where that song is supposed to play, and you get this other sort of very tense music playing and crazy stuff is happening. And so it's this weird, this like dreamlike sort of surreal, mixing and matching, juxtaposing of elements that are sort of familiar, but there's variations. They're being applied in these like unexpected kind of ways. And I think the kinds of things that disc 1 does that are unexpected are now being further developed in unexpected ways. Like we were saying from the beginning, this game messes with your expectations of a Final Fantasy. And so now, yeah, there is something to that. Like the way that the structure of this game is unfolding in a kind of musical fashion. I do think the music that is originally used for Balamb Garden, at least one of the versions of that song is called Ami, French for friend. right? And I don't know if that's exactly the version that we're hearing or if it's yet another version. But at any rate, there's some sort of very close association in either the composer's mind or the developers as they were going through and naming the tracks and assigning them to different parts of the game, assigning that melody, that music to this theme of friendship, and particularly, I guess, the friendships that are developing, the bonds that are developing within the party. Um, I really liked the point you made last time about how the party is, I think you said it's the basic unit. It's not the individual protagonist that's the basic unit, it's the party. And there's permutations within that, there's relationships within that. Um, there's something, again, I think very Trinitarian, right? If you want to say that, about like the fact that your party is 3 people and yet it is one basic unit. There's something there. I mean, that idea is definitely getting riffed on in different ways here, but that's a choice that the developers made again. And usually it is 3 characters in a party, although there are sometimes more, and of course sometimes there's fewer because you don't have that many party members yet or whatever. But that does seem like, one of the things about the number 3 is that it is very related to the number 1. It's the closest in some senses to the unity. So yeah, I do think it's kind of silly how difficult it is to talk about the music, partly because it is not like identified for you within the game. You have to sort of go outside of the game to get the names of the tracks that you're trying to talk about. And then when you do that, you sort of get mixed up about which track is which because they have some different names and there's different nomenclature out there. So that's just a little bit, I don't know, tedious for the purposes of trying to discuss it in a kind of like loose fashion, like we like to do. Like if you were going to sit down and really study it, I guess you could. But it's the playthrough that I've been reading for a while. They were noting every time a new song appeared, like within the game, and it was really helpful. But they seem to have stopped doing that. This person is called Cool Ghost, and they have a Final Fantasy VIII, very exhaustive, like almost slideshow kind of thing of like this image, that image, this text, that text. And for a while they were dropping in all the times that the music changed, and then they just, I guess, got tired of doing that. Or maybe as songs repeat, they're not noting each time they come back in. So oh well.
That's interesting. I mean, it's a lot of interesting stuff. And I do want to touch on the fact that the Balamb Garden song is called Ami Friend, and plays in a moment where the characters in the party at the missile silo are questioning several things. Will they live or will they die? Were they successful or did they fail? And why were they chosen? One character in brackets thinks no. The other, Irvine, thinks it's because for precisely the opposite reasons, because he doesn't trust him. And so it's a moment where the nature of their relationship is being questioned. And why did he send them? And the answer is crucial to what they've achieved. Were they sent because he trusted that they would be successful, or were they sent? And I think this is lurking in the players, in the back of the player's mind, because they're not on Squall's team. Were these just the sort of dumping characters, or the characters that have been undeveloped that one doesn't want to play on their main team? And so it's not only questioning Squall, but it's sort of questioning you as a player. Have you been taking seriously the party as the fundamental unit? And would you be sad if these characters died? And what would you lose if these characters were to now be inaccessible to you? I wanted to also mention that the music, I think, helps us to be further disoriented. So now we've tried to return home. We've come back to Ithaca, and it's not as we left it. There are suitors in the house. And there are people running about, missing a save point. The doctor is necessarily aloof, doesn't even know what was going on. And we don't know what's going on. So not only do we not know what's going on in the world politically, religiously is way far beyond us right now. What is the relationship between GFs and sorceresses and magic, and what is our power differential between us and Idea? which seems cinematically different at this point. In the same way that we are capable of altering reality and turning creatures into cards through a GF ability, which is itself a strange thing, she is capable of just stopping bullets. So and impaling us, but keeping us alive. And so now we get back to our nice, wonderful home, and it's very like the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, when one returns to the Deku Forest or whatever as an adult, and nobody recognizes you. It's like it is a battleground. This place that was once a safe haven. This place that was once an educational facility where there were, lots of rules, and you weren't allowed to ride on a hoverboard, and had to act in particular ways. Now it's a battleground between these two sides that we had only seen the very vaguest hints even existed in the first place. Just a little bit of tension between faculty and Sid, which again makes me wonder what Quistis was. Instructor is perhaps not member of faculty or something, because she can wear the funny hat and robe. In any case, battle lines have been drawn. This high energy music is playing that is not the relaxing, beautiful Balamb Garden music that I sometimes listen to when I study. And home is no longer home. Not only is home under major threat, God knows whether those missiles are going to hit them or not, but there is internal division within the home. So there's a foreign invasion coming, as well as some sort of internal one going on too. And so utter chaos has erupted in Squall's world. And add to that, he doesn't know whether his friends and potential love interest were either successful or are even alive, and has the responsibility of having chosen them for that mission as leader.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine a game in which it would matter more who you put in either party, right? Like, there are small differences. Apparently, like if you put Zell in the party that goes to the garden, you get slightly better items. When someone gives you an item, it's like an upgraded version of the item or whatever. And I think you also see slightly different text based on who's in which location. So like, it would have made sense if General Caraway like said something when Renoa was showing up in the party that's talking to him and playing him at cards or whatever. It doesn't apparently matter, because I guess he doesn't see anyone behind the leader of the party. I don't know. Anyway, it's fine. But it also, as it stands, it still opens up that question that you're posing, like, how do we imagine our protagonist to be making these decisions, right? Because it doesn't give us a lot of indications as to why Squall is choosing the people that he chooses. We have a rationale for how we chose. Other players could do it other ways, and they might have thought about it much, or they might have thought about it not at all. Right? It's interesting to think from within the story frame, what would have made sense for him to do, and what sort of reasons would he have had for his choices in doing things. The first thing that really leaps out at me is that he's sort of obeying this unwritten rule of three. Like he doesn't make a party that doesn't include three people. He makes two parties that have exactly three people. And maybe that's like a one of the bylaws of the Seed Handbook that we saw being quoted between him and Quistis at one point, whatever. I don't know. But there's that. And there's also, I guess, this sense of like, again, the way that the game's locations are and are not time bound, right? Like, every time you go back to Delling City, it's always nighttime there. Every time you go back to Garden, it's daytime there, except for that one time there was a party and it was nighttime, right? So and I don't care if the missile site is never accessible again in the game. I don't mind if that one gets blown up. I wasn't going to go back and explore it more. I'm okay, right? It had a few drop points that were decent, right? There's a full cure. That's a pretty powerful spell. But whatever, I can give that one up. But I would really care if Balamb Garden got blown up or whatever, or changed in some way that made it unrecognizable. that would be a bummer. That would be almost like losing a party member, you know, in terms of how connected we feel to that place. It's Squall's home, right? And so this is a thing that games do also, where, you know, a location is suddenly swarming with enemies where before it was peaceful, or it's changed in some way that's irreparable, right? At the end of the world of what's it called, World of Order or whatever in Final Fantasy VI becomes the World of Ruin. In Final Fantasy VII Disc 3, everything's different on the world map as well, and that happens within locations in some cases too. So I think that's part of what I guess gives me the most anxiety about this part of the game is like, so, you know, are we going to lose this place? But when we had gone away from it, it was not with the expectation that we would never return. And I think there's, yeah, something comparable, I guess, like psychologically for growing up. You might not fully realize that when you set out from a place that was home, that you really can never go back, right? Like if you go back to that place, it's not the same place, and you're not the same person, right? So there's some, I think there's something of that that's being explored there with Squall returning to the garden. Yeah, and I guess I'm also expecting to see something important happen because Quistis is present. I don't know if that will be borne out or not, but she should have relationships with people there that will be explored, you know, with her being in your party. I don't know, maybe not.
I'm hoping for the same. I like what you're saying about the locations being time bound, and they're also time bound within the game. So in the same way that you mentioned Final Fantasy VII Disc 3, it's impossible to not acknowledge the situation, because anytime one gets in the airship, there's this giant meteor in the sky that confronts one. So even when I would go to Golden Saucer over and over again in order to win chocobo races, in order to eventually, when I did against that dang chocobo racer, Wayo or whatever his name is, who has a black chocobo who's always got absurd stats that are better than yours, even when you have absurd stats. But I would, you know, I spent a lot of time in the Golden Saucer and thought about the contrast between playing these games of sort of skill but also luck in this you know, sort of Las Vegas-esque, carnival-esque casino, while a giant meteor hung in the sky that would all sensibly destroy the world. Just the contrast in tones. But
yeah,
I like that. I like how the spaces are also represented in time by their changing music. The music serves to change the tone and the mood, but also the sort of psychotemporal space of the game. The moment has shifted. It's a new moment. This is a new scene. You know, in the sort of temporal geography of a video game, like a play, it unfolds over time, right? And this is something I was thinking of earlier, that perhaps in the second disc, again, something annoying about this game, besides the fact that it requires so much skill in order to really harness its potential, and also keeps you in a state of disorientation, is that oh, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting where I went because of that tangent. But oh, sorry, excuse me. Is it now? I've got it back. Just took a second. Is that potentially the game is intentionally putting few safe points in it and at long intervals, so that the player has to take segments in a way that the game developers have more control over. That it is almost as if the developers are suggesting this is going to be a time that builds momentum, and you really need to play more significant chunks in order to get the right impression here, which is annoying, I think, for us as players, because we've lost the agency that we usually enjoy, which is and the sort of tacit a social contract that one has with the game developers, that there be a save point every 20 or 30 minutes so you don't lose too much, and so that you continue to play the game. But I agree with you that they've been pushing that conceit a little bit far, but also that I am enjoying that we come back to Balamb Garden. How do we know that it's new? Well, not only are there people running about, and are there faculty members everywhere willing to engage in combat, as well as monsters and random encounters around. Though now that I have Diablos, I have encounter half, so I don't see as many of those. It's the music. The music shows that this is a place of action now, and that the situation has changed. You have not come home. Sid is not even in charge. To some extent, it's like the modernist situation in the early 20th century that Nietzsche prefigured. God is no longer in charge. Insofar as Sid is not in charge, and these terrible missiles from this sort of demoness, demoniacal character, who seems like she's going to be very effective at taking over this world, given how successful she's been so far, are coming to blow up this place that doesn't even have its Albus Dumbledore, doesn't have its, its Gandalf or Saruman, depending, because he was the head of the Wizard Council, doesn't have the person in charge that would steer the place clear of danger. And the music helps to indicate that, and that the scene has changed. Now we're in scene 3, act 4. And this is a very different place now from act 1. Even if the place looks the same in some ways, many indicators suggest that what is called Balamb Garden is no longer the same place as Balamb Garden in disc 1 in the first 3 hours of play.
Yeah, it's a mashup of the Balamb Garden that was, and the kind of chaotic, violent missions, right, that we saw Laguna and his party going on, or the first mission where we actually leave the continent that Balamb is located on, and go to Dalat City for our first real taste of combat, right? So so in a way, while I don't agree literally with the interpretation of Squall is Dead, I do like the kinds of parallels that it helps you to start to draw, and ways that you can start to see from the developer's perspective, perhaps, why some of these choices were made, why they're sort of interesting to set the game up this way. The question that keeps coming up in this part of the game, right, is will you fight or not, right? And like you said, I think it's more skillful. It's more in keeping with your sort of donning the garb of the soldiers and sneaking in to try to avoid fighting. I don't think there's actually random encounters at all in the missiles area, right? So even if you don't have that GF ability, you just get a break from random encounters for a while. So that's kind of nice. And again, it comes back to like, so what are seeds for, right? Are they for fighting mercenary missions for whoever pays them? Maybe. Ostensibly, yeah, they will do that. But probably there's a deeper meaning if the sorceress is onto something there. And I think we're kind of encountering that in another form here, where there's these low-level enemies that the garden staff are sicking on you, and so there's that traditional JRPG random encounter violence going on, sort of, although it seems a little more purposeful here. And then there's this other thing where you're trying to rescue people, you're trying to save people. Even the theme, from before Fujin and Raijin, they were just kind of like knuckleheads. But they're going to go and try to tell everyone, warn them that the missiles are incoming, and there's and there's fighting everywhere, right? And anyway, just we have to sort of figure out what our purpose really is, and we do that by going back to this place where there is chaos and trying to figure out why, figure out what is up here. I do wonder, what happened to the other party as that explosion engulfed them. But I don't know if I was ever really convinced that they were gone after that one. And
Paul and Cypher, the rug was pulled out from under us.
Yeah.
But okay, just because I know we have to cut things short. We did get mention of the fact that Headmaster Sid sent away most of the seeds who are on Sid's who are on Sid's side. So interesting, not this Garden Master side. So that they could fight this bigger battle. So there is some larger battle looming, and there is some apparently bigger raison d'etre behind them, rationale underlying them that Cypher and Idea were trying to get at. But I also just wanted to mention, just to tantalize all the listeners, that in the same way that Balamb is no longer the same place, neither are you. Neither is your party. You know, Quistis, Squall, and Zell are now battle hardened. And I think very quickly we will Squall's ability will be recognized. That these are no longer just trainees who have gone out, but these are warriors who are returning, and you know, soldiers insofar as they, in the mercenary sense of it, they are full professionals, and they are you know, top of the totem pole sort of fighters. Even though they had so much trouble with Idea, compared to their peers, they've seen a lot of action apparently. But I have to run. I guess I should also mention in the end, I happen to have my 400th episode for my lecture on Wednesday. This is 401, but in spirit, this is the 400th episode. I remember how proud we were when we had done 100, Wes. So, well, let's get to 1,000.
Easy, yeah. Within this decade, I think that'll happen.
Absolutely. Maybe our hair will disappear, change colors, but there will be and hopefully lots of records of lots of interesting literature and video games too. Well, thank you for meeting at this off time conversation, and hopefully we can get oriented ourselves during this very disorienting game where Squall is almost certainly dead. I'm just kidding. Nah, I don't like the theory that much either, but I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Okay, have a good one.